Welcome, I'm Sam Faddis. This is Ground Truth, and today we're going to be talking about the first coup attempt in American history. It's been referred to as Spygate, the Russia hoax, whatever, but I think we call it that to emphasize that that is precisely what it was, maybe still is. With us to talk about that, Sabrina DeSousa, an old friend, an old colleague, agency officer, American diplomat, herself been the victim of misconduct at the highest levels when she was cut away for and abandoned for her alleged participation in a fully sanctioned operation. Sabrina, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So look, you and I have talked about all of these issues many times in regular contact. We could probably talk forever about this, but I'd like to start out with this sort of focus. One of the things that really troubles me about this entire status of the investigation, I guess, the status of the investigations at this point, multiple investigations into what it appears to me to be clearly a coup attempt against Donald Trump, is that I see sometimes that the way this is drifting in the press is in the direction of some folks sort of acknowledging that there was misconduct, getting ready to cut away people like Peter Strzok, concede that the FBI was over-exuberant or partisan, and maybe we need to revamp some regulations, but otherwise kind of do the predictable, sweep the dirt under the rug, cover this up, pretend like there is nothing bigger going on here. And to me, and I think this is really where you and I have the value added given what we did for a living for a long time, to me it's very clear that what you have here is a hidden hand. In other words, in any coup, covert action, what you really have is a lot of disparate actions, a lot of different people doing different things. It's supposed to appear that this is all spontaneous or uncoordinated. It's supposed to appear that they're doing this, of their own free will. But what's really happening is that you have conspirators behind the curtain, if you will, who are manipulating all this. This is all planned. This is all orchestrated. And it's really that level of the conspiracy we need to get to. And to me, again, this is obviously all my opinion. You have folks at the level of John Brennan in the Central Intelligence Agency who have conceded that early on in this thing, he stood up what he calls a fusion cell, really a counterintelligence element at CIA headquarters, which really was the nerve center of this. And another aspect that you and I both appreciate, but most people have no reason to appreciate, is when you move into this realm of counterintelligence and an intelligence agency with principles like compartmentation and so forth, what it means is not only can you reach out and touch people and orchestrate things, but you have the capacity to tell people basically to do things or to task people to do things, and they don't really have the capacity to ask why. In other words, in the CIA, you can literally go to somebody and say, we're doing a counterintelligence investigation. We think there's a spy amongst us. And for that reason, I'm tasking you to do this. And literally, you can't tell your boss. And it's not that common, but it does happen. And for good reason, because maybe your boss is one of the suspects, or maybe one of your coworkers is one of the suspects. So you have a machine that is built to do this kind of thing, move chess pieces around on the board. And ultimately, you can have all sorts of people who participate who don't even know really what they're part of. But when I look at this, that's what I see. What I see is a conspiracy that reaches, well, at least to the level of CIA headquarters. But quite frankly, given what we know about the dossier and everything, has to reach beyond that into at least some elements of the White House and into the Democratic National Committee. So that's, my sort of preamble. How do you look at this?
Well, you're exactly right, because the agency we know would do similar things using similar tools, but it would be for an operation that was as part of the mission, right? a priority part of the mission.
Right.
And that's what it was all built around. Everything from the counterintelligence to the propaganda to the disinformation, all of these elements that are over here, including leveraging foreign governments. What's very, very disconcerting here now is this is Plan B. Plan A was for a Clinton win. But this was a just-in-case thing that was sort of over there to start, to sort of go down the road, but maybe they wouldn't need it at the end. But then when they did, they sort of sprung into action in a few different ways. That was the eventual unraveling. But I think the big thing that concerns me the most in this whole thing is leveraging foreign governments to target U.S. citizens. To me, I feel that the most because that's exactly what happened to me. Over 15 years, it started out one way as an operation. Yes, okay, there's a cover-up and, the higher-ups all protect themselves. But then when it became personal and countries were used, literally 2 countries were used now, to specifically target me by none other than John Brennan, then it is really of concern. And you're exactly right, too. If there are no consequences this time, it's going to happen again. It is because with the CIA, that's the other thing, and we can also talk about this. A lot of times the lessons learned are more how not to get caught again and what to put in place not to get caught again. That can work for an operation. But in this case, it's going to be, okay, we got caught, trying to bring down the presidency. Well, now we shouldn't get caught again. And this is a one-off thing. That's what the rank and file are told, that kind of thing. This is going to be tragic if everyone just sweeps this under the rug and walks away.
Yeah,
really.
The broader historical implications here, frankly, terrify me. And I don't use that word lightly. I'm not just using that for hyperbole. You can love Donald Trump. You can hate Donald Trump. You can wish they would take his Twitter account away tomorrow. I don't care where you are on the spectrum. I mean, I know where I am. But if you get to the point where people at senior levels in Washington, D.C., can just basically say, I don't like this guy that the people elected. I don't think he's fit to hold office. And I'm not going to go out and defeat him at the ballot box or combat him in the Congress. I'm going to stage a coup. And if we can really have that, and then there are no consequences and nobody goes to jail. I'm laughing not because it's funny, but because it's so tragic. You understand that our entire democratic government, our entire republic, is done. I mean, this will now become the norm. And you may be a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat and wish that Trump had gone away, but no rule book here says that this coup only gets staged against Republican presidents. I mean, we will follow the Romans down the path which led them to lose their republic and end up with emperors. And, you find out who the next powerful guy is, who's your president, when Washington tells you. You become a subject and you lose everything. So I feel like we've got to follow this. On the foreign government thing, this is another element where I think you and I, the way we look at it, we see the obvious indications of the involvement of foreign governments. And yet, most of the people looking at this thing to date really haven't discussed it much at all. One of the things that troubled me looking at the recent list of unmasking requests in regard to General Flynn, right? There's this list. Right. I mean, unmasking, basically, for those folks who aren't in the trade, means there's some sort of signals intercept, an electronic intercept of some kind is typically what we're talking about. And it's some foreigner talking to, and the report will be written to say, an unnamed American citizen, because that's the way these reports are written, to protect the identities of American citizens, because we're not supposed to be targeting Americans. And then you can make a specific request as an official to unmask that person, to have the intelligence community tell you, okay, so who was that American citizen that was talking to the Russian or the Chinese citizen? And the point is, maybe that is relevant in some cases. So that's what we're talking about with Flynn. We're talking about a bunch of situations where on a whole bunch of different dates, a whole bunch of different American officials requested that Flynn's that he be unmasked, that his identity be revealed. And one of the things that strikes me is if you look at that long list, you see all kinds of officials in Washington, D.C., all sorts of people in our embassy in Rome who are making requests. Yet you somehow don't see anybody that I can tell from the list who's in London, one of our major diplomatic outposts, maybe the most important in the world, huge intel presence. And we know that much of this conspiracy flowed through London. And yet you don't see anybody in London asking for Flynn's identity to be revealed. And one of the explanations I would submit to you, to look for your comments, would be because they didn't need to, because they were getting that information directly from the British equivalent of the NSA, GCHQ. In other words, they were bypassing entirely American intelligence and using British intelligence to spy on, well, the National Security Advisor of the United States. So what do you think?
No, absolutely. And that's becoming more and more clear now. So if we take a step back, literally this group of individuals, Brennan, Clapper, McCabe, really did think that, okay, 5 months left. We can do this. We can do this. We can hold on for 5 months. We can stall for 5 months. And then along came Rick Grenell, that he opened a little spigot of 4 footnotes, and suddenly everyone went, oh my God, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This completely changes the narrative on one case, you see. And then came the unmasking. And again, suddenly it's like, wait a minute, why do so many people need this? And how come on the 29th of December, when Sergei Kislyak, the former Russian ambassador, and Flynn talked, there's no record of anyone asking for the unmasking. So, and both of these, Flynn for sure was overseas, and perhaps Kislyak was as well. I think this entire, because it involved U.S. citizens, because it involved the Trump campaign, I believe, and they're all U.S. citizens, I believe this thing started a long time ago as a just-in-case thing. The fusion cell was created to bring in the FBI so the CIA wouldn't be kept out of the loop, and the meetings took place in Rome, but the intelligence came out of the same databases we share overseas. It's very likely that the CIA gave the British, without saying Trump and Trump family or the campaign, a set of parameters, okay, this sort of thing, can you look for that? And that caused the British some concern, and they came in, and the concern was ramped up. You know how sometimes you can say a lot to scare everyone and cause them concern, as in the case of Brennan going to Harry Reid, look, there's Russian interference, and it's going to be with the Trump family. So he sowed seeds, and then the CIA doesn't have to say how they got it, because they can always say, oh, sources and methods. It's very, what do you call it, sensitive. So all along, what's happened is the British are feeding the information into the U.S., and when they needed something, and they didn't really need to unmask anything, because all that information, if it came out of the British databases, would have gone to the chief of station in London, who would have taken it to the British ambassador to keep the British ambassador in the loop on this whole thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of that is entirely plausible. And one of the things that really strikes me when you're talking, because I think you're absolutely dead on, is you keep coming back to this understanding the context, which is, okay, so this was a just-in-case thing, or to quote Strzok and Page, this is the insurance policy, right? The first plan is we don't lose the campaign to Trump. Then it's, but if we do, okay, then we're going to pull this card. But then, as you keep pointing out, this same kind of thought process applies in stages. So up until Grenell unmasking, declassifying a few things very recently, now we had shifted into okay, well, we just got to drag this out until the November election, and the point being, none of what we're talking about here would have ever come to light. This was not a how are we going to explain this? This was this never happened kind of thing. To quote all the bad,
and no one get to know about it.
Yeah, to quote all the old bad spy movies, I was never here, I've said too much, goodbye, kind of like this never happened.
Right.
Nobody would ever have to account for this. Donald Trump would be destroyed one way or the other. And now, as soon as you have a Democrat, if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, nobody ever would have heard a whisper about this. If the coup attempt after Trump was elected had been successful and he's removed, there are no inquiries. There's no ongoing Durham investigation in that world. And if they win in the fall, and God forbid, and Donald Trump leaves the White House, every inquiry into all of this will cease instantaneously. There'll be like a giant, we'll pave it over with concrete. Nothing will have ever happened. And nobody will face any consequences.
Right. The first trip, and I was looking at some FOIA, the first trip in November, that 2016 after the elections, that Brennan, Strzok, Page conducted pretty much was to the UK, to London. That was the first trip they did. So that was plan B going into action again, which was, continue down the path of the Russian investigation. It's going to be Trump. They tried to get in Trump. And that's where we came up with the Mueller report. Then we came up with Ukraine. Then we came up with, because of CrowdStrike. And then we came up with, the impeachment and all of it. But there's and then also all the meetings, if you remember, took place in Rome, not in the U.S. Christopher Steele went out there. It was run by the FBI, and where the Italians have used the same playbook that they did with the Milan rendition, the one I was convicted of, which is, here's the public face of the accountability. Look, we've held these people accountable. These are the people we fired without saying why we fired them. There's Mifsud, look that way, go after this guy and chase down someone who's disappeared for all intents and purposes and keep that thing going. But really, the people who are responsible are right there. They're the same people, one or two at least, who were responsible for approving the Milan rendition. Their names have never been known. They've been covered up. It's the same thing that's gone on over here as well. It's completely the same playbook.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is another thing that I think is obvious to you and I, and again, not obvious to normal people who haven't spent their lives doing what we've done. Ultimately, when things start to go bad or there starts to be focus where you didn't want it, okay, somebody's got to get cut away. I used to joke all the time when we were running an op. First thing we got to do is designate the scapegoat. I meant it tongue in cheek. But look at Benghazi. I'm not suggesting that it is related to the coup attempt, but it is crystal clear that the White House manipulated the narrative in regard to what had just happened in Benghazi because they didn't want to say we had just had a terrorist attack. They wanted to. They wrote out these talking points to blame this on some video created by Coptic Christians that had provoked a demonstration that had gotten out of hand to shift a narrative. I know from talking to the guys that were on the ground there, and that nobody in Benghazi or in Libya told the White House anything that remotely resembled that. None of the reports, state channels, CIA channels, said anything about a demonstration. It was crystal clear what had happened. Okay. Exactly. And also for those who actually are not in the know of these things, and I used to always say, how is it possible that you can have a safe house in a village of Benghazi, which is a compound, and you have these cars coming out that are armored with some
white guys in there,
Yes.
and go somewhere. And for people not to know in the first 10 minutes that they took up residence over there, who they were. So there's big surprise. Oh, my God.
Of
And,
course. Yeah.
how come no one knew about this?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a year in Kurdistan in the run-up to the Iraq War. We'd get junior officers who would show up and ask, what's our cover? And I would say, well, look, there's a bunch of white guys with guns in Land Cruisers who live in a walled compound. So maybe there's one stupid guy somewhere in a village who doesn't know we're CIA. But if so, he's the only person for 100 miles around who doesn't know you're CIA. Right, of course. And there's at some point nothing you can do about that if you're going to function.
Right.
So the fact that these guys are targeted is, as you're pointing out, no surprise. But Mike Morrell, acting director of CIA, stands up and says completely absurdly that the White House was not involved in changing these talking points. It was all him, and he disregarded everything that came in from the field because a couple of unnamed analysts, according to him, told him something different. To all of us in the trade, you can't really even say that without starting to laugh. It's so absurd and ridiculous. And yet he said it. It was accepted. He covered for the White House. And now he has a job pulling down six figures at a think tank aligned with the Clinton Foundation in Washington, D.C. Because he didn't.
Right.
Hillary lost. He didn't get his job in D.C. So his consolation prize is he now has the tough job of sitting behind a desk, probably doing nothing, and getting paid six figures. And that's the way these things work, right?
What happened after Grenell released those talking points, right? Not talking points, the footnotes, and then the unmasking and the tip of the iceberg, and suddenly everyone's talking about this again and talking about it a little differently.
Yes.
So for the first 2.5 years, there was this big propaganda, disinformation, deception campaign, and the CIA excels in it. The media ran with it. The media pretty much also convicted Trump on many occasions, right?
Yes.
Because also we have a society now that you're either for Trump or against Trump. And if you're in one of these two things, whatever is put in front of you, you're going to see what it is you want to see.
Right.
And now, and I was watching the Sunday news shows this last Sunday, some of the reporters are still trying to pin and pick those disinformation things up and run with it, even though they've been at this point been debunked, you see?
Yeah.
And I really believe that there needs to be a whole lot more released in this case. There needs a whole lot more, because all of this stuff happened abroad. So we have to look at Britain, we have to look at Italy very closely right now if we want to uncover some more and level the playing field to a certain extent before this election, because right now it's anything but level, you see?
So let me ask you one last question, and then we can close out. And then I think we need to come back and revisit this whole continue the conversation very, very soon. Speculation. Obviously, we're offering our opinions. They are informed opinions, and I think we're very sure that we're right about them. But I mean, obviously, we don't have some crystal ball. In your opinion, how high does this go? I mean, it goes, obviously, Brennan, in my estimation, it's obvious. Brennan didn't suddenly one day wake up and decide, hey, I want to destroy Donald Trump. He's he is not the top of this thing. How high do you think, in your opinion, this thing goes?
I think it goes all the way up to the Oval Office, to Obama. And the reason I say it is because Obama left a lot of what was the national security piece of it for Brennan to run, actually, you see, at the end. And there are a few things you can see now. For example, firing, I was just thinking about this the other day, anyone who was let go, for example, you see at that point, who's on it was done. Why was it done? You see, was it really Obama who knew that this individual had to go or not, for example. A policy, where did this policy come from exactly? And because when the president comes in, the president knows only so much, right? But there's so much historical background, and it's easy for an intelligence organization to shape the narrative whichever way they want to shape it. You see, in a case like this. And so if it goes all the way to the White House, even if they know some of it, they don't know everything about it, to Obama, to Biden, overseas, it has to go to that same level of the leadership. It can't remain at a very, very low level at all.
Yeah, I don't really disagree with you, although I obviously don't think we will. I can't imagine we'll ever see the day where Barack Obama is personally held responsible for this. But I would say this, I feel certain, again, my opinion at this point, there is no way this doesn't go into Hillary Clinton's campaign, into the Democratic National Committee, and into officials inside the White House. And then I think you raise a good point. When you finally get down to the fine details of this, to what extent somebody was feeding a false narrative to generate an interest in doing this from the beginning is an interesting question. In other words, to what extent did some group of individuals push the kind of stuff that was in the Steele dossier to motivate others and say, look, no, this is for real. But knowing themselves, look, it's not real, but we're going to use this to scare you, to motivate you, to get you to come on board with this thing.
And to investigate, right. And I think that's exactly it. I think it started in August 2016 as this is just in case something goes wrong, let's start going down this path. The FBI may have been reluctant at that point, and then when Brennan went after Harry Reid, who lit a fire under the FBI, then down when everyone went down the same rabbit hole after that. You see, and that's why I think it's important to lay to rest. Okay, yes, the Russians always interfere in a whole lot of elections, and they've been doing it for a very long time.
Right.
But the fact is that, and we're hearing about it now, they were doing it in favor of Clinton and against Trump.
What?
And this thing was flipped all the way around, and right from there, that little kernel, this whole thing exploded into 3 different investigations and impeachment.
Yeah, I mean, it has struck me as obvious from the outset that if I'm Vladimir Putin and I have a choice between Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, I will take Secretary Doormat, who was the Secretary of State for one of the weakest presidents on foreign policy in American history, over some crusty old real estate magnate Republican who's probably just going to tell me to drop dead, literally word for word. No, I will take this lady because I've watched her just... Anyway, Sabrina, thanks for your time, and we will pick up where we're leaving off right now very soon.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Ground Truth.